And here's section 4 of my book, Portraits of Rodeo Clowns and Royalty. The epigraph for this section comes from my dad, Jerry Young, when he said, "It's the soil, it's life and death and sex." Gramps and the Skunk. Once upon a time, when life was in balance, Gramps saw a skunk at the door. With his trusty .22, he shot the critter with a single bullet to the head. But when Gramps approached to give it a burial, the white stripe lifted and quickly shot back with an accurate squirt to his face. Because he wore glasses, he didn't go blind, but dunked his head in tomato juice over and over. Yet the odor lingered, and the children and Grandma stayed away. So he took to his rowboat with his tackle, oars, and beer, circling the lake and quietly trolling in that perfect palace of stars. Gramps. We two sat in the bourbon bar or leaned over the rail at Cheetah's, the window covered by the green transparent shade, the light diving into a glass of white port and bounding off the metal handle of your wheelchair. Gramps, I pushed you from one saloon to another. How many women have we heard say, "Men drink and women cry"? Getting out of the car, you pushed your legless body with arms of bone and black skin so discolored and thin. You pushed yourself onto the chair. I pushed you through Frogtown. I pushed you into the tavern. This Frogtown is the ruin of your years, though the salvation of your youth. You wanted to be elsewhere. Now I'm rushing about as you never did. You were slower, even the way you talked, by gum. I never made moon. You never smoked hash. I've never ridden over a prairie hill to find Sioux encamped with teepees beating a drum in prayer. You never watched a woman trip and fall 2 stories while dancing to jazz and acid. Like you, she came dancing back up from the basement. Gramps, you patted my shoulder unsteadily. Your fingers, less the one lost to blood poisoning, shook uncontrollably. And when the ambulance attendant let your chair roll away down the street, when it tipped and you fell alone on the face of the city, you were helpless. You could no longer face Frogtown. I wear your long underwear in the winter now, the pair with the legs cut off at the knee. To the Badlands. As a small boy, I rubbed my teeth on car seat fabric, as Pall Mall smoke hid the blue road to the Badlands, as bees splattered against the windshield, as glass refracted the wild terrain. Once, I watched Grandpa pedal his grindstone, as Grandma stared from the window, moon-faced, thoughtless, and bubbling with ire. His foot pumped the wheel harder and harder. Her anger was a spreading delta, and sparks flew from his sharpening sickle. So much passes between old spouses, that hornets may squirm into their grandson's bones. What weight did I feel? What weight did I feel because Dad's ma lived in the walkout below us? I was her first grandson. How many grandkids did she eventually have? She read prayer books, and I read folklore and poetry. Then I, too, flew far from her frantic white hair. While she was dying, I saw that the dusty garage sagged, and nails' heads had loosened from the fading boards. They say ocean plates move away from one another, but I know that others collide with inevitable quaking. Aunt Hattie's broken nose. As a bubble under every conversation, it comes up within 15 minutes. The story of her broken nose 80 years ago in South Dakota. Her horse leapt the culvert. She fell, blacked out, and the mare fled into the orchard. Aunt Hattie's daddy ran from his grafting, carried her back to the dingy house, and covered her with Mama's Norwegian quilt. Finally, she felt cared for. Aunt Hattie snaps that Clara, who was 2 years older, always claimed Daddy's lap. Clara was the family beauty, with a voice of honey and the early shape of a woman. Clara's catatonic now, in the Britain home for the old. Occasionally, a breath-made bubble emerges on her tongue. Her eyelids are as still as old closets. Her sons, 2 husbands, and her father are all dead before her, but not her sister, Hattie. When I visit Aunt Hattie, she grins, and her jowls swing as loose as stirrups on her runaway horse. Her bulbous nose is crooked and droopy, and her eyes twinkle like beads of sun on the mane of a horse going westward in and out of apple trees. To the edge of the Koto. Once, 65-year-old Uncle Harold and his 90-year-old neighbor took me to the edge of the Koto. I sat between them in Tom's old truck as we drove over the rolling range, through prairie grass and dust until we stopped far beyond the cattle troughs. As he looked over Dakota flatlands, Unc said, "Here you can see for over 100 miles. At night, the lights of 25 small towns shine in the distance. And that's the James River weaving through the flats until it enters the big Missouri further south." I was 20, away from home and drifting into manhood. Unc died a couple decades later. I don't know when Tom died. I never saw him again. But he'd be 130 now, and I'm living near the big Mississippi. The edge of the drop-off. When Dad or Mom became angry, they filled the house. One would say, "Look at me," and the entire room darkened. I would shrink into myself, like a worm poked by a giant fishhook. But Dad also built a lake cabin, where I could look to a far shore with its white birch, and occasional deer, and beams of sunlight angling through the pin cherries and hazelbush. Today I see Dad fishing that far shore. Churless grackles hop away from me, and I'm happy for us all. That old buck used to tell me, it's calm here, where the bulrushes are at the edge of the drop-off. A photo after a summer swim. 3 of us boys stand in the sand beside the lake, our legs like hoe handles poking from the dripping, clinging swim trunks. We huddle, cross-armed, in small terry cloth towels. Our thighs shiver, our backs arch, our heads hunch, our wide, bright teeth chatter behind blue lips. We wear silly smiles and short, hiney hair. Our big ears and wide eyes exaggerate our skeletal skulls, so visible behind our taut, chilled faces. It took me years to understand that my mother fondly remembers us this way, and that she likes us this way. The smell of my body. The smell of my body is the smell of my father when I sat on his lap in the evening. It's the smell of a man at work in the garden, putting down stones for the pathway. It's the smell of a man who suddenly realizes that his grandson smells like his grandfather. One last pine board. A man never forgets his father's shadow. For a while, he looks up to his father, but he always remembers him from behind. The father, my father, also knows the hole where ghosts or phantoms or the intentions of a sly woman have entered my body. He watches my back, and today I watch his, as he plods through the attic, bending to re-nail one last pine board to the knee wall. His face moves closer to a framed picture of his grandfather in South Dakota, the long dead man on a mechanical reaper. The more my father stoops to retrieve another fallen finishing nail, or to pick up my infant son, the more he knows his shadow. Watching him, watching himself, I learn how to do it. That's how he taught me to walk. That's the way he teaches a gentle trail toward death and my grandfather's. Perseid Showers on the Upper Peninsula. In the sand against the washed-out birch, beside Lake Superior's flow, I gaze on a sky where Draco circles Polaris. I see the Milky Way and the Aurora Borealis, those fires of elderly minds. With Jess in my lap, his head's on my heart. We're awaiting the Perseid showers. Then they come, plummeting streaks of yellow, silver, white, or gold. They're packets of knowledge from nowhere. Each shooting star stirs a roar of acclaim when Jess lifts to take in the awe. The beauty's sublime. One star may have the solution for dismantling reactors, but we're too slow. A few driftwood stumps with tiny roots are gathering the lake's intelligent mists. Then Jess settles down to where he began, just as I did on Dad years ago. Fireboy, after Etheridge night. You came when pain shattered my convictions, and the heat in me broke out to roar through the force of my own tinder. You came in your own conflagration. Now, don't let the dry, tight teachers pull out their fire hoses and threaten you because they fear their own sparking. They don't know their own flint, steel, or fire bows. Warmth has fled them, the way the red cardinal flees a city with no trees. When we camp, you're Robin Hood, and a pirate with wands of lilac you swish through no longer still air. When you stalk and chase squirrels in hot purpose, don't let the woman who knows only her godless perfection drown you in her tears. I've heard you, in times when your soul's serene, sing like a flock of doves, so many voices together that the beauty reaches beyond the trees you've climbed. Your songs go to the river bottom where you swim in bright, colored dreaming. When fresh deer prints beside the shallow creek call you deeper into the forest, follow the spoor. Find the royal stag, accept the sweet doe milk. Curl with the spotted young one, and dream together of the great freedoms yet to be. My father followed the way. After the Tao Te Ching, number 54. My father followed the way, but didn't know where he was going. He cultivated his virtues, but didn't know what his virtues were. He knew his tomatoes, and when he cultivated his garden, he told his younger neighbor, "It's the soil, it's life and death and sex." He didn't have to know more than that. He followed the ways of his garden, and he shared his abundant tomatoes with everyone, even the nuns and the priest. My first bipedal mother. Rift Valley experts tell me that in my bones is the memory of my first bipedal mother, whose flat nose and large brow seem frightening in a homey way. What they can't tell me is whether she dreamed of joyfully flying, or swimming for survival, or spilling a placental gift of imagination. Grandfathers. A small fire lifts the frost from my grandfather's faces. We're silent. Sit close. All I see are their lighted faces, and I'm surprised to find I already know what they know. I've always known what they know. Now, I pay attention to what we know.